Hi, guys. Just wanted to offer you the opportunity for the read aloud of this article. It is about coping mechanisms, and a coping mechanism is like just how people deal with everyday stress. Um, so, when you are given an article, a couple of things that you want to make sure that you do is first of all, see who the author is. Clearly, this author is just somebody who works for Common Lit. Sometimes it's going to be somebody else. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you pay attention to the different text features that are in nonfiction and honestly in fiction too. At the bottom of every page, there is this is called a footnote. So when you see these little tiny numbers up here, it'll direct you down to the footnote to help you understand what those things are. And there's some on each page. Okay. Also, this thing right here, a lot of times people skip over it. It's important to read it because it's going to help you understand just different things. So as you read. So if you remember, we're talking about with Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, Stephen is trying to cope and deal with the different stressors that are happening in his life. And he's got a lot. And so this is just an article that kind of talks about what, different ways to do that and how some things can be positive and negative. So I'm going to read this little gray box first. Work, school, money. These are some of the most common stressors in everyday life. The effects of stress on a person's mental and emotional health may vary, but without the proper tools to cope, stress can have serious consequences. It can even manifest physically, causing pain and high blood pressure. It's important to learn how to adapt to, minimize, or overcome stressful situations, but some coping mechanisms are more advantageous than others. How do you deal with stress? As you read, identify the benefits and drawbacks to certain coping methods. All right, here we go. People have many different strategies for dealing with stressful situations, some helpful and some not so helpful. Psychologists call these coping mechanisms. A coping mechanism is a method that a person uses to deal with stress or conflict. It's a way for a person to master or minimize the effect of a stressful situation. Psychologists categorize coping mechanisms into two different categories: adaptive coping mechanisms and maladaptive coping mechanisms. So here's adaptive coping mechanisms. Adaptive coping mechanisms are positive ways people alleviate, which if you go down to the footnote, alleviate stress to make something less painful or difficult. So they're going to get rid of stress. Anticipation. Anticipation is a way to reduce the stress of a difficult challenge by anticipating what it will be like and preparing of how to cope for it. Some literary critics believe that this is the reason why people enjoy reading about, watching, and analyzing tragedies. Thinking about tragic events helps people prepare for unforeseen, difficult circumstances. Seeking support. Finding emotional support from others or asking for help can be an instrumental way of maintaining emotional health during a difficult period. The brain's response to worry enhances the effectiveness of this strategy. Stress releases neurohormones that strengthen your ability to seek emotional support by increasing your empathy and encouraging you to look for close social bonds. Neurohormones, it is a hormone, which is a natural substance produced by the body that is specifically created within the body's network of nerve cells. The neurohormone is then sent to the intended part of the body through the blood. Other adaptive coping mechanisms, there's problem solving. Problem solving focuses on locating the source of the problem and determining solutions or action steps. Developing a plan can help lessen stress that comes from the unknown. Problem solving can be strengthened by creativity, and it is a useful response to both simple and complex issues. A strong problem solving process involves defining the issue, brainstorming alternatives, evaluating and choosing between these alternatives, and implementing solutions. And finally, there's humor. People of all ages and cultures respond to humor. Studies show people who laugh and smile often live longer and develop healthier relationships. Humor is also a common coping mechanism because it can diffuse the tension of a stressful situation. However, when humor is overused as a coping mechanism, it can lead to denial or avoidance. And then it says see below. Maladaptive coping mechanisms. Maladaptive or negative coping mechanisms are more effective in the short term than the long term. Using a maladaptive coping mechanism may help people diminish negative feelings for a few days, and diminish means cause something to become less in size, importance, or value. So it helps people get rid of those negative feelings for a few days or weeks, but usually these strategies may only make stress levels rise in the long run. First one's denial. Denial is the refusal to accept truth or fact. People are said to be in denial when they act as if the problem doesn't exist, refusing to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Sigmund Freud, the famous psychoanalyst, who is a person who develops a method of explaining and treating mental and emotional problems by having you talk about dreams, feelings, memories. He was the first person to study the significance of dreams, is credited with popularizing the idea of denial. He explained it as the moment when a person is faced with a fact too uncomfortable to accept. Instead of facing the problem, the person decides to reject its existence or minimize its importance despite overwhelming evidence proving the contrary. Contrary is the opposite. Freud believed that denial was a primitive coping mechanism, one that babies develop in early childhood. Think about Stephen. He was completely in denial, saying that Jeffrey was on vacation in Philadelphia. Projection. Another maladaptive coping mechanism is projection. People are said to project their emotions on others when they blame someone else for having an emotion that they feel is unacceptable. For example, a husband who feels angry at his wife may accuse her of being the angry one instead of admitting that he's actually the angry one. Dissociation. This is another maladaptive coping mechanism. It is when a person tries to disconnect from a traumatic or stressful event. In extreme cases, a person who has dissociative behavior may even invent a new imaginary world where they do not have to face an uncomfortable feeling or memory. While dealing with stress, it is important to prioritize your physical, mental, and social well-being. When you are facing a stressful situation, learn to relax so that you can carefully evaluate how you should respond. It is also important to maintain your mental health. Think positively, exercise frequently, get enough sleep, and don't be afraid to express emotions and ask for help. If you follow these simple strategies, you'll have an easier time responding to the inevitable stress that you will face in your life. I liked this article. I think it's good with the novel that we're reading, but I think it's also really good with just everyday stressors that we face now. I mean, you guys face them as teenagers, a lot of them as teenagers. And so it's important to kind of just see how we react and if it's going to be successful in the long run kind of thing. So I thought this was a good read for the novel and for life. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out and we are here to help. Thanks.